TikTok, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. I'm your friendly neighborhood philosopher, David Wood, and with me now is the actual author of the Quran, Robert Spencer. How you doing, Robert?
I am doing fine, David. As you know, I'm not only the author of the Quran, but the author of the number one best selling Quran in the world today.
That
The,
that
crit-
is. Hmm?
the
What's that?
Critical Quran available now.
Now, Robert, you've been asked before. Why did you include so much violent, hateful content in the Quran?
Yeah, I should have just rewritten the Book of Peace, but this is the real Quran. It's what it says. There are many translations of the Quran that try to cover up what it says, but this one gives you the whole enchilada, what it says, and how mainstream Muslim scholars understand it. That is, the mainstream understanding of the passages that the majority of Muslims in the world think of the Quran in this way.
It is very weird though, because I get this book and it's by Robert Spencer, and then I start looking through it, and there are all these commands and calls for violently subjugating the world in the name of Allah, and I'm just like, gosh, maybe all these years of them saying you're a hate monger, maybe it's correct because it's your book, and then it's got all these calls for violent jihad against the entire world. Weird stuff.
I don't know where they got. I don't know what got into me. Really, it was a moment of madness.
Hey, you,
My chest was split open and my heart was taken out, washed clean. You know the deal.
you know what you should do one year? Make a follow-up Quran, but have it say all the stuff that like Western politicians and journalists think it says, right?
Good idea.
Yeah,
Only they'll probably say, yes, this is the real thing. Finally, you are telling us the truth.
yeah. The media-friendly Quran, the MFQ,
Hug them wherever you find them.
the media standard version. Uh, all right. Well, Robert. Last week we did take a quick look at the update,
Hmm.
the Ramadan Bombathon over at thereligionofpeace.com. One of the two sites everyone should be following. Everyone who wants to follow what's going on in the world when it comes to jihad should be following Jihad Watch and thereligionofpeace.com. And every year, the Religion of Peace has the Ramadan Bombathon, where he keeps a running tally of terrorist attacks and violent attacks carried out in the name of Allah, and he compares it with the number of attacks carried out in the name of all other religions combined. And we are in, happy to say, we are in a down year compared to the peak years with like ISIS and so on. But look at what happens even in a year where things are pretty comparatively slow for jihad compared to previous years. But look at what we have here. This is day 26. So this is the tally as of day 26 of Ramadan. Ramadan Bombathon scorecard for day 26, 2022. We have a list of column with terrorist attacks, and then we have the number of kills, the number of victims who've been killed. We have terror in the name of Islam. 138 attacks in the name of Islam, 782 kills in the name of Islam, and in the name of all other religions combined, 0 attacks, 0 kills. And then, of course, you have by what right-wing extremists or anti-Muslim extremists, 0 and 0. And guys, this is pretty much the same result year after year, although, again, in previous years, there have been significantly more attacks carried out in the name of Islam. And then every once in a while, there will be an attack carried out, by some other group. But basically, this is very similar to the results that we get every single year. And the reason this is relevant is you got to actually see the numbers for an accurate comparison, because somehow they pull it off every single time there's an attack carried out in the name of Allah. If it happens to be one of the few that actually becomes popular news, a popular news story. As soon as that happens and you say, hey, maybe we need to look into this ideology, the response immediately comes, what about Anders Breivik? What about that guy down in New Zealand who did the mosque attack? You see, they weren't Muslims, so anyone can be a terrorist. And so they always go to their small handful of examples that they can point to of other people who've committed terrorist attacks, and just ignore the constant, relentless, daily attacks carried out in the name of Allah. And somehow, because there have been other attacks by other people, somehow we're supposed to ignore what the vast majority of terrorist attacks are carried out for. We're just supposed to ignore that. But we're not going to ignore that. We're going to look into it. And with that said, Robert, slow Ramadan compared to other Ramadans, but has there been anything worthy of note in the past week?
Yeah, well, one thing I noticed right away when you posted the Ramadan Bombathon is that last week, if I recall correctly, there were 402 people killed. And this week, it's up to 782, which means that almost half of the people who have been killed during Ramadan were killed during the past week, which perhaps not coincidentally was also the week of the Night of Power, the night that commemorates when Muhammad was first given the first revelation of the Quran. If Ramadan is indeed the month of jihad, as many Muslim authorities have said, then it would make sense that you would want more jihad activity at the time when the Ramadan fast is most intense. Anyway, yeah.
It is just so weird, right? That, we keep hearing, this is the holiest month of Islam, the holiest month, the holiest month. And the holiest month in your religion is the month that is the bloodiest and the one where people eat the most food and call it fasting. a month long festival of gorging themselves every night and every morning and calling it fasting. and then you get a bloodbath and call it the religion of peace. It's like we live in opposite world every Ramadan. All right.
So actually, I do have an opposite world dumb infidel story to start off with.
Nice.
And it comes from Baluchistan in Pakistan, which is a province that wants to break away from Pakistan. And actually, since I posted this, a lot of people on Twitter have been angry with me, saying this is not jihad. This is the Baluchistan Liberation Army. And it's a separatist movement longing for independence for Baluchistan. That's all it is. You are an Islamophobic bigot, et cetera, et cetera. But let's look at the actual facts of the case. The story is about a suicide bombing. The suicide bombing was done on the University of Karachi campus in Pakistan, killing 3 Chinese nationals and their driver. And the bomber was I believe, I'm sorry, I said that she was wearing a burqa. And so in the immediate understanding of what happened here, it does look like, well, this is some sort of strike for the independence of Baluchistan. They're hitting the Chinese because the Chinese are working with the Pakistani government. And so it really does have nothing to do with jihad. But when you have a woman doing this, wearing a burqa, and particularly the fact that it's a suicide bombing, and this is, after all, a Muslim doing this.
Or a Mormon. You don't know because she was in a burqa.
Well, yes, of course.
Right.
But of course, everybody in Pakistan, everybody in Baluchistan, with the exception of a small minority of people, they're Muslims. And you're talking about people with the context of Quran chapter 9, verse 111, which promises paradise to those who kill and are killed. And so even if this is not, strictly speaking, a jihad struggle, that is not that the Baluchistan Liberation Army is not trying to establish Islamic law. Nonetheless, the technique used very clearly comes from within the theological and cultural context created by Islam. But what's interesting about this, beyond that, is that even the U.S. government seems to think this has something to do with Islam, and thus hastened to whitewash the image of Islam in the wake of it. And the U.S. consulate in Karachi issued a statement saying this cowardly act stands in direct contrast to the peaceful spirit of Ramadan. And so there we are. It stands in contrast to the peaceful spirit of Ramadan. Obviously, I would bet you $1,000 right now, David, that there is nary a single official in that U.S. consulate in Ramadan who has read the Quran, who knows anything, even the first foggiest idea about Islamic doctrine, does not know the theological justification for suicide bombing that is contained in Surah 9, and does not know that Ramadan, being the month in which Muslims redouble their efforts to please Allah, because jihad is pleasing to Allah, is also the month of jihad. And so we get this. This is contrary to the spirit of Ramadan. Even though they don't know anything about Ramadan or Islam, they don't hesitate to tell Muslims and the rest of the world what Ramadan is really all about. Because, of course, it's just like we see all the time. Every last Western politician, Western non-Muslim politician, knows all about, it's perfectly obvious to them that Islam is a religion of peace that has nothing whatsoever to do with terrorism. Of course, none of them have read the Quran or know anything about Islam, but they're just absolutely certain that that's what it's all about. And this is another example of that kind of bland ignorance, that they don't even know how ignorant they are.
And I just looked up the population. It's 99.28% Muslim.
There you go.
There, and but in their defense, can we say we can't blame them for wanting to break away from Pakistan? I mean,
oh no, I'm all for that. Absolutely.
Oh, I'm just saying. I can't imagine anyone who, given the opportunity, would not want to break away from Pakistan. Right? It's like,
absolutely. The question of Baluchistani independence is entirely separate from the issues created by this story. Whether even if she is a suicide bomber working from the context of Islam, which I believe she is, that doesn't negate the fact that it's a very good idea to break away from the government of Pakistan.
So we would say good idea breaking away from the government of Pakistan, but don't go around sending women in burqas doing suicide bombings and adopting the same methods of the people you would want to get away from in Pakistan.
There you go. That's it, David.
Mm-hmm.
David, that is the smartest comment of the week right there. Okay, we have another interesting story about dumb infidels and willful ignorance. The Pulse nightclub Jihad massacre, you may recall, from June 2016, when a jihadi named Omar Mateen went into the Pulse nightclub, a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida, and he murdered 49 people. And as he was doing this, he actually called 911 several times and had these protracted discussions with 911 operators in which he discussed his motives. Now, all that being said, what happened was this young man, 20 years old, did donuts on a gay rainbow mural that's painted on the road in Orlando, Florida, or actually it's in South Florida somewhere. And he left big black marks on the gay rainbow mural on the road. Now, it seems to me, okay, I'm sure this was willfully malicious and so on, but it's striking that, it's a thing painted on the road. People are going to drive on the road. Roads usually get all kinds of stuff on them, but anyway, I guess they're just going to keep cleaning this thing and repainting it. But he was sentenced to writing about the Pulse nightclub shooting and why people might be so driven with hatred for gay people that they would do this. But the thing about it is, what nobody involved in this story seems to realize is that Omar Mateen, the Pulse nightclub shooter, never once mentioned gays in any of his extended conversations with the 911 operator. And yet he did explain at some considerable length that he was carrying out this shooting, he said, just like the Boston Marathon bombers, and just like another jihadi, where the name is not in the transcript, and that he was doing it because he thinks that the U.S. was killing innocent Muslims in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and he was doing it for revenge. So actually, if this young man who was leaving the skid marks on the mural actually does his assignment properly, then he's going to end up writing something that doesn't have anything to do with gays at all and has everything to do with Islam. But because the judge doesn't know this, because of course the media doesn't report properly on these issues, the judge thinks he's going to come back with a story about how terribly anti-gay the shooter was. And he might well if he reads media reports. But if he reads what the shooter actually said himself, he'll get a very different picture, and it'll be all about Islam. And I guarantee you the judge will not be happy to get that.
Did you say that someone was sentenced to a writing assignment?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
That's like what would happen to me in like fifth grade when I get in trouble and the teacher would say, "Okay, you have to write on why you were so bad and why you broke this thing and why you stole that and so on. You have to write something on this." Wow. Although I have to say when because I had no idea where you were going with this when you mentioned the Pulse nightclub massacre, but when you were saying that, here we are, 6 years later, something was going on. People have been so stupid about jihad over the years. I actually thought you were going to say that, and to show their tolerance, they're turning it into a mosque, or they're turning it into an interfaith gathering for coffee place, and something like that, because it's always something like that.
It is absolutely.
I mean, you of course remember, you had the World Trade Center, the World Trade Center thing, and then of course, what do we need there? We need a giant mega mosque right there to show how wonderful and tolerant everyone is.
It was going to be 16 stories, which in New York, certainly it wouldn't have been a huge thing, but clearly, nobody involved in that. That was another instance of this same dumb infidel phenomenon. Nobody involved in that, except me. I mean, I wasn't involved in putting the mosque there, but I was involved in the protests. Nobody was pointing out that there is nary a single example of what they were saying they were going to do anywhere in the world or anywhere in history. What they were saying was, we're going to put this mosque here as a sign of peace and reconciliation, where there was this terrorist attack twisting and hijacking our religion. So I was writing at the time, where is there a mosque of reconciliation and peace anywhere in the world built on the site of an earlier jihad attack in order to show that the peaceful Muslims are all really with the victims? There is no such thing. But where are there triumphal mosques built on the site of jihad victories in order to mark the victory and to crow over the triumph over Judaism or Christianity or Hinduism? There are thousands of those. The Temple Mount has 2 of them right there where the Jewish temple was. Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. The Hagia Sophia was the grandest church in the Christian world for 1,000 years, and now it's a mosque. And it was converted to a mosque when Constantinople was conquered in 1453. It was a museum through the 20th century until last year. But it was converted to a mosque to show the victory of Islam over Christianity. And in the history of jihad, I show again and again and again that in the conquest of India, Muslims would destroy Hindu temples and build a mosque right there on the site, or carry the bricks and mortar or whatever the building was made of over somewhere else and build a mosque out of the rubble of the Hindu temple. and they would break the Hindu idols and strew the parts, the shards in front of the mosque entrance, so that all the Muslims walking into the mosque would walk over the Hindu gods. And that's
And
what the Ground Zero Mosque was all about.
and I have to say this goes back to the earliest stages of Islam, because I mean the Kaaba was a center of pagan worship. It was surrounded by 360 pagan idols. Muhammad takes that, sort of baptizes it into his religion, and then, according to Islam's most trusted hadiths, he goes around stabbing and smashing with a stick the 360 idols around the Kaaba. And it's just amazing. The moment I criticize Islam in any way is, why are you doing this? Don't you believe in religious tolerance? It's like, hey, if that's your standard, your prophet's got to go, man.
Indeed. Okay, I got to talk about this guy. He's my new favorite imam. He is in Gaza. He's an Islamic scholar, Abd al-Hamid Dabbous. Did you hear about Abd al-Hamid Dabbous, David?
Nope, but I have to say, anyone in that area of the world who's got the bus in his name, makes me worried about some bombings.
Indeed. Okay, Abd al-Hamid Dabbous. This guy, here he is. He's honest. This is an honest Islamic scholar. This is what he said. You're going to love this, David. Through jihad, Allah conquers lands as well as hearts and minds. And I think, yeah, what jihad does.
Wait, could you repeat that again? That was awesome.
Through jihad, Allah conquers lands as well as hearts and minds. It's the hearts that gets me. Oh, it's like Safiya bint Huyai. Her heart was conquered, right?
Yeah.
Muhammad comes to Khaybar. He murders her husband. He murders her father. He rapes her right there on the battlefield. That's winning hearts right there.
Yeah, here you go. Here you go. Islam melts hearts and faces.
That's it, man.
Wow.
That's it. Oh,
these are good taglines, though. I mean, that's a.
Yes, you're right. All right. There's more, though. He's not done. Jihad is. He'll be here all evening. Jihad is the means by which the Muslims, first of all, defend their lands, their lives, their honor, and their religion. And in addition, it is a means to spread this religion. Because the bottom line is that Allah sent down this religion so that it would spread throughout the world until all the people become Muslims. I've had so many Muslims deny this. And, guys have debated, guys on Twitter, people who review the books, and they deny this outright. And I think, in the first place, it mystifies me that they could be so dishonest. But also, here is, at last, an honest Islamic scholar. But then he goes on to say, and I just said he was honest. I don't know. You be the judge, David. We do not want to kill or terrorize people.
But you leave us no choice.
we do not want to kill or terrorize people. I was thinking, well, Allah says kill them wherever you find them. So I guess what he is actually, he's one of the guys in that Surah 9 is talking about. No, it's Surah 2, isn't it? Fighting is prescribed for you, even if you dislike it. Mm-hmm. And so he doesn't like it. He doesn't want to do it, but he's got to. Nor do we want to plunder people's lands or rights, but we want people to convert to Islam. This is Allah's will, not ours. When groups of Muslims set out on jihad for the sake of Allah, they first call people to join Islam. If they accept this, this is what Allah wants and what the Muslims want. Then those people become Muslims with the same duties and rights as ours. If not, they must pay the jizya poll tax in humiliation, or we will fight them until we attain either martyrdom or victory with the help of Allah. Okay, you ready for this? You still with me, David? Is that we got the best part here? Here last. Jihad is the pinnacle of Islam. It is what makes Islam glamorous, strong, and lovable.
It sure is.
Lovable.
This guy sounds like I don't know if he's accidentally being funny or if he's like deliberately trying to be funny with this stuff.
He looks very earnest. You can see the video at Jihad Watch or at Memory, the source, Middle East Media Research Institute, and he seems to be completely in earnest. I don't know.
You know what really makes the world love Islam? Beheading apostates. You know, that's what really you see a head getting. You know what's amazing is there are people who like they believe this. Like there was this there was this element within ISIS that just found something aesthetically pleasing about slaughterings and slitting throats
Oh
and
yeah.
taking sex slaves and stuff like this because they're making all these pictures and calling them lions and so on, showing them on the mountains and so on, and releasing all these videos of all them, and then somehow lots of the people who went and joined were pointing to that as the reason they joined. I just started watching the footage of these guys, slitting people's throats and chopping people's heads off, and I said, "Gosh, this is where I need to be."
Mm-hmm. Because Allah commands it, and these are the people doing it. It's exciting. It's glamorous, as Dabu said. The Kardashians got nothing on jihadis. Okay, I've got plenty of honest jihadis. I've got some more here. Hang on.
We do love some honest jihadis.
Yes, here we go. These are unnamed, unfortunately, but there's been quite a lot of unrest, of course, recently surrounding the Al Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, and the mosque, as we discussed last week, has been the site where various stones and other weapons have been gathered to throw at Israelis. And the Israelis went in to clear out some of the jihadis, and then they've been charged with storming the mosque, desecrating, defiling the mosque, and so on. But anyway, on official Palestinian Authority TV, this is not just some outlier, an imam, unnamed, led a prayer. And you can see all these crowds of people in the video praying along with this imam. And he prays, "Allah, delight us with the extermination of the Jews, of the evil Jews, excuse me." And he also called for the extermination of their hypocritical supporters who have evil in their hearts. And now this, of course, is all based on the Quran saying that the Jews are the worst enemies of the Muslims, chapter 5, verse 82. The Quran's many passages criticizing the Jews, blaming the Jews for various things. So this guy is calling for them all to be killed. And it's worth noting that when he prays that Allah will bring about the extermination of the evil Jews, a lot of people think, well, that's really, really bad. But he's just hoping that God will smite them from heaven. And that's not really a big deal because Allah is not there to be listening and doing it. And that's fine. However, remember that chapter 9, verse 14 of the Quran says, "Fight them and Allah will punish them through you, by your hands." Mm-hmm. And so if they're the executors of the wrath of Allah, then a call for the extermination of the Jews is going to end up with some Muslims believing that they ought to begin working on exterminating Jews.
Yeah, and I have to say again, it's I haven't heard the vast majority of things you bring up in this weekly show, but if this were a Christian, calling for this sort of thing against Muslims, we would not only be hearing about it right now, we would be hearing about it 10 years from now. Whenever there's a call for violence in the name of Islam, would be, what about that pastor? What about that pastor who said that about Muslims all those years ago? And yet it's just no one seems to care. No one seems to care when it's coming out of Islam. It's like people have set their expectations so low that nothing is surprising anymore.
Yeah, and they just ignore it. I mean, I see it actually all the time on Twitter. People saying, people posting links from Jihad Watch, and then invariably some Muslim comes in and says, "Oh, your source is Spencer," ha 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 ha, and that's it. And they think that they can just act as if the source is unreliable, and that's the end of the story. And unfortunately, even though I am scrupulously accurate, this is something that is done to pretty much everyone who talks about these issues, that they're just smeared as being unreliable, and then the story itself is dismissed.
Well, that's not going to work anymore, because you'll report a story, and then someone will share the link to your story, and then someone will come in and respond, "Ha ha ha! That's Robert Spencer. How can you trust that?" And you say, "What? How can we trust the author of the Quran?"
Yes, now the game has changed.
Yeah, now they can't deny anything you say because they'd be denying the author of the Quran, and then they wouldn't be Muslims anymore. Busted.
Okay, let's go to Italy. In Italy, very interesting thing. Sharif and Nabil Azer, two Coptic Christian brothers, and they were walking along in Italy. I'm trying to find the city, Turin. Walking along in Turin, and of course, this was last week, so they were walking along during Ramadan in Turin, and they were Coptic Christians. They're wearing crosses, and they were smoking. And a group of Muslims came up to them. One of them stopped and was actually drinking water, walking along in the street. And a group of Muslims came up shouting at them, "Ramadan, haram." And apparently, because these are Egyptian guys, they assumed that they were Muslim, and reminded them that it was forbidden to drink water during the day and to smoke also during the day in Ramadan. And actually, Sharif, one of these brothers, he says, if tomorrow I went out to eat a sandwich in that same area, I would not go out alive, because when they saw that they had crosses, they didn't back down. They just grew more belligerent and ended up beating these two Christian brothers. And one of them recounted, they want to apply Sharia law to us because they consider us inferior and want to dominate us. Now, I thought that was extraordinary, because I have heard so many Islamic apologists in the West say Sharia is a Muslim thing. It applies only to Muslims. And non-Muslims just don't need to even think about it, because it has nothing to do with them. Years ago, long before any of you watching this were born, there was a campaign for anti-Sharia laws in the United States, in various states. And the Council on American Islamic Relations fought fiercely against these laws, but they did it in two contradictory ways. They said, nobody's trying to bring Sharia to the United States, and those who are trying to bring Sharia to the United States just want to have it for themselves. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to bother any non-Muslims. But this incident in Italy shows that there are all too many Muslims, unfortunately, who believe Sharia has everything to do with non-Muslims, and that the non-Muslims have to obey the Ramadan fast. Otherwise, they will offend Muslims and hurt their religious sensibilities and make it more difficult for them to keep the fast, and that is simply not allowed.
Although I have to say, if as you were breaking down the story, I was thinking of a funny response when they said Ramadan haram. I would have gone like, "Oh, Ramadan is haram? Oh, okay, no Ramadan, haram." That'd have been fun.
Yeah.
By the way, you see the comment? Tim Chapman said, "We need to pass a Spencer phobia bill."
That's it.
Right? You get that? We can start saying it now, because you're the author of the Quran, that any criticism against you is racist and bigoted against your book.
That's right. A book that is revered by over 1 billion people. Mm-hmm. All right. Plenty more jihad, and time's a wasting. Interesting story. Let's see. I clicked off it, unfortunately. Oh, interesting story out of Nigeria. A group of Muslims walked into a house of prostitution, but they were not there for the clientele. They were, or for the employees. They were there because they wanted to ask everybody who was in there to recite a passage of the Quran. And those who could not, 10 of them were killed on the spot. This is reminiscent of many, many other stories. Not many people know this, but this actually happened in the United States, in St. Cloud Mall in Minnesota in 2016. There was a Muslim there, I believe his name was Dahir Adan, and he went around asking people in the St. Cloud Mall if they were Muslim or Christian. And then he would stab the people who said they were Christian and let any who said they were Muslim, and of course there were quite a few, because that's a very heavily Muslim area, and he let them go. This also happened many other cases. I've got a big list of them at Jihad Watch. Last January in Nigeria, Fulani jihadis stopped this man and started beating him. Then they stopped and said, "Hey, are you Muslim or Christian?" And he said he was Christian. They beat him even harder. In Burkina Faso last November, Muslims asked villagers if they were Christian or Muslim, then murdered the Christians. In the Philippines in February 2019, Muslims murdered a man for failing to recite Quran verses while releasing 6 others who could recite them. In Mali, Muslims screaming Allahu Akbar took hostages and then freed those who could recite the Quran. In September 2013, at the Westgate Mall in Nairobi, Kenya, Muslims murdered people who couldn't answer questions about Islam. Many, many other examples of this. And obviously this is because Muhammad said in the Quran, actually the Quran says, Muhammad is the apostle of Allah. Those who follow him are ruthless to unbelievers, merciful to one another. And so this incident in this brothel in Nigeria, as well as these other incidents and many others I could detail, is an example of that ruthlessness to the unbelievers, but mercy to the Muslims.
And I remember way back when stories were coming out about the mall massacre in Kenya, that as the jihadis are going around, like, other people are like, they're basically trying to memorize an Islamic prayer. People are passing it around. They're like, say this, say this. As soon as they memorize this real quick, so that they could claim to be Muslims. As for the brothel, though, there would have been an easier. Well, I can't say it was easier, but if they wanted to know who the Muslims were in the brothel, they could just walk in and say, "All right, who here had the woman agree to temporary marriage?"
Exactly.
And
it's
then
true.
the women would have gone, "Oh, he had me agree to temporary marriage," and they would have said, "Oh, okay, well, you're good to go then, because we know that's how you hire a prostitute in Islam. You get her to marry you for an hour, and they'd be safe."
There you go. Similar story out of India, and that was a video that circulated of a woman in Delhi, and she says that she's complaining about how the Hindus in her area are acting, and she says that by Allah's will, there will be a calamity which will strike only the Hindus and not the Muslims. And the fact that she would wish for such a thing, that a calamity would strike only Hindus and not Muslims, is once again an example of the same tendency. Muhammad is the apostle of Allah. Those who follow him are ruthless to unbelievers, merciful to one another. Shall we go over to Malaysia? The Kuala Lumpur Sharia High Court sentenced an MP, a Malaysian MP, Maria Chin Abdullah, to 1 week in jail. And the reason why she was sentenced to 1 week in jail was because she said that Islamic law, Sharia, discriminates against women. And so to show her, apparently, that Islamic law does not discriminate against women. They gave her a week in jail to think it all over. What they would have given perhaps to a man, maybe they would give him a week in jail too, so that was the point. Or maybe they would have given a man a lighter sentence. We don't know. But in any case, a week in jail for saying that Sharia discriminates against women. Now, Sharia quite obviously discriminates against women.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 2, verse 282 says a woman's testimony is worth half of a man. Chapter 4:11, this is the Quran, of course, says a woman is to inherit less than her brothers. 434, of course, has beating the wife. On and on. There's no beating the husband. And on and on and on. But if you point it out, then you're the problem. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like you and me, David, that we are reviled as Islamophobes and racists and bigots and so on for pointing out what Islam teaches and what the Quran really says. And the problem is not ever with what Islam teaches or what the Quran really says. It's with us for daring to note it.
Two quick comments here. Catherine Gill, these are both on the issue of muta. Some people are not familiar with this. So Catherine Gill, I think she's talking about muta here. She says, what if they don't agree to a divorce? So you're going to marry the girl for an hour, and what if they don't agree to a divorce? Catherine, the agreement is made ahead of time. So it's, hey, we are only married for the next hour, or 3 hours, or 3 days. It's whatever you agree to in the contract. And I've mentioned here before that I was contacted years ago by a former prostitute in Australia, and she said in her area, but by far her dominant clientele were Muslims, and she said that they always made her recite something in Arabic before having sex with her, and she didn't know what muta was and so on, but she found out she was actually agreeing to be married for the duration of them using her body for pleasure, and then they would pay in return. And keep in mind, this goes right back to the Muslim sources. Where Muhammad's followers would give they would say a garment, so a piece of clothing, or a handful of flour or something like that, in exchange for having sex with a woman and being married to her temporarily. Along those same lines, also Michael Datovic said, "Isn't muta marriage a Shia thing?" Michael, it's in the Sunni sources, so it's in Sahih al-Bukhari, it's in Sahih Muslim. Many Sunnis are convinced that Muhammad eventually forbade the practice. Everyone agrees that Muhammad allowed it at one time, that it was allowed for a while. Many Sunnis are convinced that Muhammad eventually forbade the practice. However, the same sources, the same Sahih sources that say that Muhammad eventually forbade the practice, those same sources will also have conflicting narrations where it was one of the later caliphs who forbade the practice. And so if it was actually a later caliph, the question is, can he override something that Allah and Muhammad allowed? And what you'll find is there are plenty of Sunni Muslims who, as long as they want to practice muta, will cling to those passages and say, it wasn't Muhammad, it was a later Muslim, and then they lied about Muhammad. You got something for us, Robert?
The Critical Quran right here, David, the best-selling Quran in the world. And
number one.
It goes into muta marriage in chapter 4, verse 24. Because, as I point out, the Shiites claim that chapter 4, verse 24, Surah 424 of the Quran, the chapter in women, says that it's allowed. That is, temporary marriage is stipulated in the Quran, according to the Shiite understanding of 424, because it says, and those whom you enjoy, give them their shares as a duty, and there is no sin for you in what you do by mutual agreement after the duty. Indeed, Allah is ever knower wise. The Shiites say that is the permission for temporary marriage. And then I go on to explain the Sahih hadiths that you just mentioned, and quote one from Sahih Muslim, where Muhammad is depicted as saying, "O people, I have permitted you to contract temporary marriage with women, but Allah has forbidden it now until the day of resurrection." However, the Shiites do still insist that it was, as you noted, the Caliph Umar whom they don't recognize as an authority at all, who abolished temporary marriage. And Jafar as-Sadiq, the sixth Imam of the Shiites, that is the sixth of the 12 Imams who were the great leaders of Shiite Islam, or the 11 Imams, because they're waiting for that 12th guy to come back. He didn't do much while he was here. He was taken away or disappeared or occulted when he was 5 years old. But in any case, the Shiite hadiths say that Allah has made it lawful. Jafar as-Sadiq says, Allah has made it lawful in his book by the tongue of his holy prophet, meaning in 424. And so there's a Shiite hadith in which a Sunni is pointing to Umar outlawing the practice, and Jafar says, so you can stand by the words of your friend, but I stand by the words of the messenger of Allah. And also I've got an alternative Shiite manuscript that actually says that the Shiite temporary marriage passage has been suppressed and used to be much more extensive in the Quran itself, which is yet another example of how Muslims themselves testify to the Quran being edited, fragmentary, and incomplete.
Indeed.
Okay, we've got a lot of standard jihad this week, of course. In Germany, there was a man who issued a bomb threat stopping train service for hours in a busy area of Berlin, I believe it was. Offenburg. And the press and the police said, oh, we think right-wing radicals are stopping the train service. But, of course, it turned out to be, what a surprise, an Islamic jihadi. If you had the coffee ready, you could give us another surprise take. But in any case, all right, we have more, of course. We have Abu Bakr Deghayes in Britain, who went to a mosque, the Brighton Mosque and Muslim Community Center, on November 1st, 2020. And he started talking about jihad and making a stabbing gesture as he talked about jihad. And as it happens, his two sons, Abdullah and Jafar, were killed fighting jihad in Syria. And he called explicitly for jihad by the sword and was sentenced this week to 4 years in prison for encouraging terrorism. And so here again, we have a Muslim who's being honest about the meaning of jihad, and he's preaching, calling for jihad in a mosque. He has now been jailed for 4 years for doing it. And the big fallacy that the British authorities are operating according to in doing this is that they seem to think that when he gets out in 2 or 3 years, because there's no way he's going to serve the whole sentence, he's going to be reformed? The prisons in Britain are hotbeds of jihadist recruitment. If anything, he's going to come out more of a hardened jihadi than he was going in, because there's absolutely no effort made in British prisons or in any other prisons anywhere else to disabuse jihadis of their jihadist ideas. And any that are based on the de-radicalization false assumptions that jihad has nothing really to do with Islam, or it's that to say it's violent is a misunderstanding of Islam, and so we'll teach the true peaceful Islam. And so he gets this small sentence. He'll be out within a couple of years, and probably we will hear from him again.
And it's sort of a parallel to the prison system in general. There's kind of a problem that needs to be figured out. It's like if you some young guy, 18 years old or something like that, commits a crime, steals something or something like that, and you lock him up, and the idea is, hey, we're gonna lock him in this building with a bunch of other criminals and leave him there for 2 years or something like that, and think that he's going to come out a better person when you know the environment that you're in for 2 years is a place where police are the enemies and everyone around you, every person you're around is a criminal. And then you know that problem gets multiplied if you're talking about jihad, because I mean I've never mentioned this before, but before but when I was locked up before I became a Christian, there were guys who would come up to me and say they would start by saying, "You seem really smart," and they would say, "If you plan it, we'll do it." Right? So they were asking me to be the mastermind behind their crimes. Like, I plan the robbery, use my big brains to plan the robbery, and they'll go out and do it. Well, guess what? You've got similar things with jihad. It's you're getting a bunch of guys locked up and a bunch of guys who are eager to wage jihad, but they're thinking, "Man, I'm kind of stupid because I did this and immediately got locked up." And the smartest one will eventually rise to the surface, and guess what? You're forming future terrorist cells there, right? These guys become your buddies, and they're all criminals who are obsessed with jihad, and now you're putting them together and then releasing them back into society. It's brilliant stuff.
So, David, what did you tell them about being a criminal mastermind?
Well, at that point, I was thinking, cool. Right? This is, this is early on. This was like the first year and stuff like that. And I was thinking, man, I'm going to have me an army by the time I get out of here. But I was thinking, hey, we'll do it. Instead of just running in there and robbing the pawn shop or something like that, we'll plan it. I'll plan a distraction on the other side of town where there's a big fire and all the police go to that side of the town. And now you guys go in, blah, blah, blah. And I'll be down the road with my binoculars and watch for the cops and stuff like that. And I'll tell you when they're coming so I can tell you which way to go and stuff like that. But fortunately, I got out of that stuff.
I'd have watched the movie.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, also in the UK, this is another dumb infidel story. Dr. Omar Abdul Kafi gave a lecture at the Finsbury Park Mosque, the notorious Finsbury Park Mosque. And it's interesting that it was there because I'll tell you, the Finsbury Park Mosque was the mosque where Abu Hamza, the famous jihad leader who had one eye and his two hooks for his hands because he'd blown himself up in a bomb making accident, and he's in prison now for trying to open up a jihad training camp in Oregon. He was preaching jihad pretty much openly at the Finsbury Park Mosque in Britain. In 2009, I went to that mosque. I was in England, walked all around London, went to the mosques. I mean, what else does an American tourist do in London but go to the mosques? And went to many mosques, including the Finsbury Park Mosque. And at the Finsbury Park Mosque, this guy did a lot of dawah, tried to convert me to Islam, gave me a lot of books, including a very helpful translation of the Quran with notes by Maududi. And I asked him I said, didn't you guys have some trouble here a few years back? And he said, oh, yes, but those people are all gone, and now we're all moderate now. But apparently not, because Omar Abdul Kafi, although of course that was some years ago too now, he has preached, quoting the famous genocidal hadith, excuse me, the famous genocidal hadith saying that the end times will not come until Muslims kill Jews, and the Jews will hide behind trees, and the trees will call out, "Oh, Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him." He referred to the 9/11 attacks as a comedy film, and he is not a British national. He is, I believe, from Pakistan. No, he's Egyptian born, excuse me. And he applied to come to Britain to preach at the Finsbury Park Mosque, and they let him in. Now, I ask you, what's wrong with this picture?
Nothing.
Well, I'll tell you, as you know, I myself have not been back to Britain since 2009 because in 2013 I was planning to go and got a letter from the UK Home Office saying I was barred from entering the country because I had said Islam has a doctrine of warfare against unbelievers. And so here is a guy who also believes that Islam has a doctrine of warfare against unbelievers, but he likes it. He's in favor of it. And so he gets in. Apparently, the British authorities do not have a problem with you if you think Islam has a doctrine of warfare against unbelievers. They only have a problem with you if you're against it. And so Abdul Kafi is actually one of many jihadis, and I have a long list there on the post at Jihad Watch, who have been let into Britain. And they don't seem to have any problem with that. Of course, they don't want to appear Islamophobic.
Now, by the way, wasn't there a time limit on your ban?
Yes, it was 3 to 5 years, but I know it's still in force, and I know it's still in force because of the good people at American Airlines.
Mm-hmm.
I do try to avoid American Airlines whenever I can because of this, but sometimes it's just not avoidable because American Airlines, for example, might have a nonstop 3 hour flight somewhere I need to go, whereas every other airline there's a connection somewhere and it becomes some 8 hour endeavor. And especially with the mask business, I really just wasn't up to that. So I would bite the bullet and fly American. Now, what's the problem with flying American? American is linked to, in some way, British Airways. If they're not the same corporation, they're partners of some kind. And so British Airways, at the behest of the British government, has made it so that I am treated as a terrorist whenever I want to fly American Airlines, even though I have no intention of flying to Britain. Every time I fly American Airlines, I have to wait for an hour at the counter to check in. I can't check in online, and I have to stand there while they are talking furtively on the phone and looking at me and talking on the phone and waiting, and then they come and ask me some questions. Where am I going? What am I going to do there? Blah, blah, blah. And it's all because they want to make sure, somebody actually told me this at one point, an American Airlines official, that I'm not going to change my ticket somehow and end up in London. And it's because I'm such a terrible person, of course, and am barred from Britain.
And by the way, that wasn't all this just because you wanted to lay some flowers on the grave of Lee Rigby or something like this, a guy who was slaughtered by jihadis in the name of Allah and practically beheaded?
Yeah, I had no plans to speak. It was going to be laying the flowers, visiting some friends and associates in Britain. That would be it.
So just to be clear, you wanted to go to honor a victim of jihad, someone who'd been slaughtered in the name of Allah, and they actually people were filming them afterwards as they explained exactly why they killed this guy, and so and
the bloody
and so you have to be banned from an entire country for that. But if you sit around saying that you approve of the killing of Lee Rigby and you agree with the ideology that led to it, Britain will basically roll out the red carpet for you.
Yep. You can go on a lecture tour, get all the mosques.
Priorities.
As the author of the Quran, I'd be happy to speak at all the mosques in Britain if the ban is lifted. So perhaps the Finsbury Park Mosque or one of the others could start a campaign to allow me into the country so that they can get the author of the Quran into the mosque.
Yeah, and I'd love to see them I'd love to see them ban the author of the Quran. Go ahead and try that one. There will be riots in the streets. Just announce to the mosques that the author of the Quran has been banned from the country.
Yeah, that would be huge. Oh my goodness, the unrest would be endless.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, there's plenty more, David, but I see we have run out the clock.
Jihad never ends.
Indeed.
Never ends. Just keeps coming forever.
There was it's not really a joke. You can't say it's a joke, but because people were killed, but there was a Muslim walked into a bar in Nigeria and 20 people were killed. Not a good punchline.
Nope. Yeah, that could be some sort of skit where a comedian is telling stories, but it's just not a joke.
Indeed.
Yep.
And we can end with another Muslim scholar, actually, Ali as-Salabi, who is from Libya, and he said Ramadan is the month of conquests that changed the course of Islam and advanced it tremendously. And he has a long lecture actually pointing out how many of Islam's great victories took place during Ramadan, the month of Jihad.
We'll close out by answering one quick question here. So, hey David, what are you going to do if Allah was real and you stand before him? Well, I would ask him why he sent the stupidest, most perverted person in history as the greatest moral example for mankind. Why did you send, if you really wanted me to believe, why did you send a guy who had sex with a prepubescent little girl and who took the wife of his own adopted son after causing the divorce by lusting after her? Why did you send a guy who gets caught having sex with his slave girl, then makes an oath to stop having sex with his slave girl, then gets a supposed revelation saying that he can break the oath to his wives? Why'd you send a guy like that? A guy who affirms the inspiration, preservation, and authority of the earlier scriptures, even though he contradicts them. And why do his followers have to be people who constantly deny everything that he said whenever we point out these issues? And so I basically get into a discussion like that and say, why did you have the least reliable person in history as your primary representative and only representative? Because keep in mind, Muslims will say they believe in all these other prophets, but they only believe what one person says about all the other prophets. So they really actually believe in just one guy. And then when all the other prophets contradict what he says, they say, that was corrupted. They never said that. Why? Because our one guy said it. So the one guy who is the only foundation of this entire religion is a guy who is the least reliable person in history. You could pick any random person walking down the street, and I would think that person is infinitely more reliable than Muhammad. When you put together the collection of features that Muhammad had, any criterion you can think of for spotting a false prophet, Muhammad did it and then some. And so there is no more obvious false prophet in history. And so I'd probably, hey, why is the one guy you sent the most obvious false prophet in history? Why?
Hey,
why
David,
is it?
I answer that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go.
If I answer that as well, real
Sure,
briefly.
sure.
If I showed up before Allah, I would quote chapter 32, verse 13 of the Quran. And if we had so willed, we could have given every soul its guidance. But the word from me concerning evildoers took effect, that I will fill Gehenna, hell, with the jinn and mankind together. So you're saying, Allah, that you could have guided everyone to the truth, but you just didn't want to. You wanted to torture people instead. And you expect me to respect you? You expect me to love you? You expect me to think that you're just? That's abominable. That's monstrous. And so I have opposed you all of my adult life, and I am proud of having done so.
We're proud of that. All right. Hope that answers your question. And, well, ladies and gentlemen, that is This Week in Jihad. Fortunately, Ramadan is ending, so maybe the jihad attacks will let up a little bit, and then we won't have people being persecuted for not taking part in Ramadan. But we'll see what happens. So until next week, be sure to get a copy. Be sure to get your copy of the Critical Quran if you haven't already. Link is in the description box.